welcome to everyone who has joined this afternoon for this session. And on behalf of Endometriosis UK, thank you very much for taking the time to explore the topic of endometriosis and work. Firstly, my name is Rosie. I'm Head of Development with Endometriosis UK, and I also work with our Endometriosis Friendly Employer Scheme as well. So a very warm welcome from me. I'm really pleased to say that I'm not the only person you're going to be hearing from this afternoon. You'll be hearing from a couple of other guest speakers. So firstly, we have Becca. Becca by day is a marketing professional, and by night and all her other spare time is a volunteer with Endometriosis UK and volunteers helping lead a support group. We're also pleased to welcome Sanchia. By day, Sanchia is a diversity and HR specialist, and she's also an endometriosis support group leader, as well as being on the charity's board of trustees. So we're really pleased to have Becca and Sanchia with us today for this conversation. A very quick overview of what we're going to be covering. Hopefully you're in the right place. This is a webinar about endometriosis and work. We're going to start by talking just a little bit about the basics of endometriosis, what it is. We're going to explore how it can affect people at work and what the considerations can be for employers who are looking to be supportive. So to get into the main topic of conversation for today, what is endometriosis? In a nutshell, endometriosis is a condition or a disease where cells like the ones that line the womb form elsewhere in the body. Now, the visual I bring up on the screen in front of you here, the reason for this visual is that most often endometriosis forms in what's called the pelvic cavity, so the area around the pelvic area of the body. However, endometriosis can form in other parts of the body too. It's estimated that up to 12% of cases of endometriosis involve this happening in other parts of the body. So, for example, you can have cases of thoracic endometriosis, endometriosis on the chest or the lungs, and even rarer cases of endometriosis even in places like the brain or sometimes the eyes, for example. However, as most often endometriosis forms in the pelvic cavity, that's why we've got this visual here. And as you can see, you've got examples there of patches of endometriosis forming around the fallopian tube, around the ovary, for example. And essentially what happens with this tissue is that it reacts to the monthly cycle in the same way as the cells that line the womb. But unlike the cells that line the womb that leave the body as a period, this blood has no way to escape. And that can lead to pain, inflammation, and the formation of scar tissue or adhesions, which is where things are caused to stick or fuse together. Now, this is a really complex condition, and symptoms and impacts of it can really vary from person to person. But the most common symptoms to look out for would include chronic pelvic pain, so that can be consistent or recurrent pain, painful periods. And by painful periods, we're talking about a level of pain that stops someone being able to go about their daily life. So, for example, those with endometriosis may often report being caused to vomit or pass out because of the level of pain that they're in. So we're talking about a really serious and interrupting level of pain that people can go through. Bowel and bladder problems are also a common symptom of endometriosis. So, for example, pain when having a wee or a poo. Painful sex is also a common symptom, so that can be pain during or after intimacy. Fatigue is also a common symptom of endometriosis. And finally, for some of those with endometriosis, they will experience difficulty getting pregnant. To put that into context, it's estimated by doctors and researchers that 60 to 70% of those with endometriosis will get pregnant, what's referred to as inverted commas as spontaneously or without further intervention. But it's estimated that between 30 to 40% of those with endometriosis will experience difficulty getting pregnant. And finally, something that can commonly be experienced by those with endometriosis, and many report heavy menstrual bleeding as well, although that's not an official symptom. In terms of how endometriosis is detected and diagnosed, currently in the UK, and as per the guidance that we have, the only definitive way to diagnose endometriosis is through something called a laparoscopy. You've got a visual on the screen in front of you here, but in a nutshell, a laparoscopy is a keyhole surgery procedure where a trained surgeon conducts that operation to see if there's the presence of endometriosis. Normally, a biopsy is then taken to confirm and give a diagnosis of the disease. However, as you can imagine, that's very invasive. It's a surgical procedure. It requires general anaesthetic and the associated recovery time. Then there are a few things that doctors may do if they've got somebody who's got symptoms of endometriosis to try and detect it, or to rule out other conditions as they're looking into diagnosis. So, for example, imaging can be used. So things like a pelvic MRI scan or a transvaginal ultrasound scan can sometimes be used to explore diagnosis. But it's important to note that a clear scan and clear imaging doesn't mean that somebody doesn't have endometriosis. So we hear many cases of individuals who may have a scan conducted and the results be clear, but then they go on to have a laparoscopy and endometriosis is then diagnosed. Unfortunately, at this time, there is no known cure for endometriosis, but there are a number of treatment options. The main categories for those are surgical, so surgical removal of the tissue where it's safe to do so. There are a range of hormonal treatments which can be discussed with medical practitioners as well. And finally, pain relief or pain management overall. So that can include things like prescribed pain medication or over-the-counter pain medication, the use of the likes of TENS machines or the use of heat to bring pain relief. And also there are pain management pathways and treatments available via the NHS, which can include things like pelvic physiotherapy, for example. So those are sort of the broad mainstream categories of treatment that are currently available by the NHS. To delve a little bit more into the impact that endometriosis has, so it may or may not surprise you to know that it's actually a very common condition. Endometriosis affects 1 in 10 of women and those assigned female at birth. So in the UK alone, that's estimated at 1.5 million individuals, and that makes it actually the second most common gynecological condition in the UK. In the UK, it currently takes an average of 8 years to get a diagnosis of endometriosis. So that can mean years of actually living and trying to work with some of the symptoms that we've talked about before somebody actually has an answer for what's causing those, or in the workplace context, even a name for what they can write on their return to work form or their HR records around what they're experiencing. It's estimated that endometriosis has a really significant cost to the UK economy, and that can be in terms of loss of work, but also the health and treatment costs associated. And finally, as I've mentioned, we don't currently have a known cure for endometriosis, just as we don't definitively know what causes the disease. To look more broadly at the scale of the impact of the disease, the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Endometriosis conducted a study which surveyed over 10,000 of those with the disease in the UK. And that was back in 2020 and highlighted many stark findings. So firstly, it highlighted that many of those with endometriosis face lots and lots of back and forth between their GP or hospitals before receiving a diagnosis of endometriosis. And there were many issues cited there around the effectiveness and helpfulness of the treatment and support that they received. So some real need for improvement there. And then also thinking about the personal impact, we saw some really stark findings there as well. So particularly a really significant impact around mental health, living with this disease, and it really just affecting people's ability to live life in the way that they wanted to. But alongside that, particularly in the lens of employment, very sadly, 38% had concerns about losing a job because of endometriosis, and then 35% experienced financial hardship because of the disease. So what we see through this is a disease that can impact on every aspect of a person's life, and it doesn't stop when somebody walks through the door or opens their laptop or begins their working day. To spotlight on that a little bit further, last year there was a debate in Parliament about endometriosis in work. And ahead of that, individuals from across the UK shared their experiences of trying to live and work with this disease and the impact that it can have. And just a few quotes here highlighting the stories that we hear all too often as a patient charity about what people go through. So we sadly heard stories of people being forced to quit or losing their jobs because of the impact of trying to work with this condition. People who were seen as unreliable or passed over for promotion or progression opportunities. So really highlighting that need for more workplace understanding and support, which is why it's so brilliant to see so many of you on this webinar this afternoon. I'm now really pleased to hand over to Becca. So Becca very kindly is going to share her own personal account of living with endometriosis and the impact it's had career-wise, and also a little bit around the workplace support that she's received. So over to you, Becca. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rosie. So hi, I'm Becca. Thanks for having me today. Thanks everyone for coming along. It's wonderful. And as Rosie said, I'm going to talk a little bit about how endometriosis has affected my work and the kind of support and non-support I've received. So I wanted to sort of split it between pre-COVID and post-COVID, because I think that that's pretty relevant and has really changed the way that a lot of us view work. Pre-COVID, I was in a job that ultimately I felt like I had no choice but to leave. I wasn't trusted, and I ended up quitting and finding another job. I work as a marketing manager, so I think that I'm quite lucky in terms of someone with endometriosis in that my occupation allows me to work wherever I have a laptop. So I'm not customer facing, I'm not front facing. In this job that I did have, I had an occupational health, I had, the surgery proof, all these things behind me, reasonable adjustments. And I was the first person in my team to be allowed to work from home for reasons that wasn't to do with childcare. And essentially, I was told to my face that only people with children should be allowed to work from home, which is sort of a double-edged sword for someone with endometriosis, or for anyone really, because no one knows what someone's going through with fertility. I would walk into rooms, people would stop talking. I would overhear people talking about me, how I'm never in, how they don't know if I'm doing my work, and that included my line manager. I was working from home 2 days a week, so it's not like I was full-time working from home. But it really was sort of an up in arms outrage that there was someone that had started and was working from home. And essentially, I realise now it was discrimination. I didn't realise at the time, but I have a disability, endometriosis. If it impacts your life long term, it's a disability, and it is covered under the Disability Act. It can be. And so that was something that really affected me negatively during and post being in that role. It really affected my mood. It made me feel, as if I can't be trusted, I was very demotivated. I felt like I needed to come into the office more. And so it sort of started this vicious cycle of where I got sicker because I was trying to prove that I was doing my work and that I was good enough and that I could be trusted, but it didn't make any difference to the team I was in. And then I would have more sick days because of the stress I was under. So I left, I moved to a new role, and then COVID happened and everyone had to work from home, or, people couldn't work. And I think that really changed a lot of things for a lot of organizations. And it really made me sort of actually think it was quite ironic that, after I left this role, all of that team was working from home. And I do want to just point out that I think that situation I was in was actually a good, bad situation, because I feel like I had it lucky, and I do have it lucky. I've already sort of mentioned that because of the job I have, I can easily work from home. I had occupational health that was available to me. I had reasonable adjustments that could be made. And I had a laptop, so as I said, I could work from home. It meant it was possible for me to work in other places. And I know that there are so many occupations and roles out there where that's not possible, or that the person with endometriosis doesn't have the luxury of being able to work from home, or they just don't want to, because that's okay as well. You know, some people, you just don't want to do it. And so I think that, you know, moving forward post-COVID, what I really want to sort of emphasize in my time chatting with you guys is to really continue with the trust that was built up over COVID for people that can work from home, and the compassion about how people suffer. And I think that COVID gave us all sort of a big scene of, you know, compassion and caring for each other and being kind, and just to continue that. I think that it's important to emphasize that, you know, endometriosis is a fluctuating condition. It can be classed as a dynamic disability, which means that, you know, you can have flare-ups. So you might be fine one day and then not the next. And there's sadly no set schedule. So for people who do work in customer-focused jobs, or who can't work from home as part of their role, and they suffer with endometriosis, there will be days that they can't work because they're poorly and that they need to take time off. That doesn't mean they can't do the job as a whole. It doesn't mean that they shouldn't be allowed to have that role, or they, you know, they should be pushed out, or that they shouldn't have that, go on that career path. It just means that they need reasonable adjustments, and compassion about what they're going through, because, you know, I think it should go without saying that we don't want to have this disease, so it'd be much easier if we didn't. I just want to sort of give some key takeaways, because I'm going to finish up in a second, but key takeaways that I'd love you guys to take with you from what I've said. We have to all be really careful about discrimination in the workplace. There is no cure, it's just management, and we all have bad days and good days, and we can't control it. We can do everything, we can try everything to try and control it, but it has its own mind, sadly. Just openly communicate. Try and openly communicate with the person that you're working with who has endometriosis. Be honest about any struggles you're having as the person supporting them. That's okay. You don't need to know all the answers. You don't need to know everything to do with endometriosis. You just need to be willing to learn and open. And it's fine to make mistakes when you're dealing with this. It's just about how we all manage it together and move forward. And I think the key thing is be kind. Just be kind. You know, I think we could all do with more kindness in the world, kindness and compassionate. We're all going through our own battles. And the thing with endometriosis is that it can be a constant battle. And we want to work, we want to be trusted, and we will work. So yeah, I think that's my final key point. Just be kind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Becca, and a very important final point to land on. Thank you so much for being so candid with us about what you've been through, and sharing some really helpful insights, which I know will be very, very helpful for many of those on the webinar today. We'll move next to Sanchia. Sanchia, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. So Sanchia is going to share a little bit about her own experience, and also her perspective as an HR specialist and HR and diversity specialist around the importance of workplace support. So over to you, Sanchia. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I think my Wi-Fi might be playing up, so do let me know if you can't hear me at any point. So a very good afternoon to you all, and it's great to see so many of you on this webinar this afternoon. So as you can see, my name is Sanchia Alasia, and I was diagnosed with endometriosis in December 2010. And since then, I have taken the decision to be open and upfront about my condition to my employers, so that I can get the support that I need to enable me to be my best at work. Also, since I was diagnosed, I have been a trustee of the charity, I think for 2 or 3, probably coming up 3 years in the summer now. And I run a support group for sufferers living or working in Barking and Dagenham, Redbridge or Havering. So as you've already heard, endometriosis can drastically alter the lives of many people. For me, and how it affects me, I find I have to do a lot of planning around my menstrual cycle, but also in everyday situations where my pain can flare up quite unexpectedly. Having endometriosis does have an impact on my daily life, and so it's really crucial for my employer to be aware of how to support me, because I do have this and it will affect me in the workplace. So I think I want to start off by talking about how we can understand the difficulties of working with endometriosis. So it's really critical to understand the difficulties that people like me face when living with endometriosis. Sometimes the pain can be incapacitating and it can prevent me from working physically, or maybe I have to work a bit less. So, you know, sometimes I might need to take time off work as a result of severe pain and symptoms, and other times I might be able to work, but maybe not a full day and maybe not travel into the office. And I think as employers, it's really important that you are prepared for this and take an understanding and empathetic approach to offering support and offering flexibility with your sickness policy and the triggers within it. Because if this is happening to somebody every single month, then obviously they might trigger a sickness review inadvertently. Alongside the physical pain that I suffer, you've also got to think about the mental impact that this condition has. And so it's essential that I work and collaborate with my colleagues, and that you as employers work with your employees to determine how you can support them and what would work best for them on an individual level. The second thing that I want to touch on is really being open to flexible working arrangements. And I know the pandemic has kind of forced this on a lot of employers, which is good in a way, but also as we sort of are out of the heat, I guess, of the pandemic, if I could say it like that, I think you as employers do need to think about flexible working arrangements. So it's crucial for me as an endometriosis sufferer that I have flexibility in my working arrangements. And this is flexibility separate to a hybrid working policy. So I'm imagining a lot of you as employers have developed, as my workplace has developed, a hybrid working policy. So my workplace hybrid working policy is that it's a 60% on-site and 40% working from home, and that can vary if people work part-time and so on. So I actually work a compressed 4-day week, so I do 50% on-site and 50% in the office. However, a standard hybrid working policy, as helpful as though it may be, doesn't necessarily cover me when I have flare-ups. So I have a separate arrangement that when my endometriosis flares up quite badly, normally during my period, but not exclusively, that I will work fully that week from home or on reduced hours as necessary for that week, so I can take extra rest breaks due to the fatigue I have due to the lack of sleep that I have during that time period. So last week, for example, I worked the whole week from home on slightly reduced hours because I was having a particularly bad flare-up during my period. And as employers, we're really encouraging you to be open about your flexible working policies and allowing some leeway for employees to have the working conditions that they need to be able to live with their conditions. So those flexible arrangements, like what I described for myself, you know, perhaps it's a job share, perhaps it's working from home when you're having a particularly bad day or particularly bad week, even permanently reducing hours could all be options for you to explore with your employees. And your employees will feel more comfortable asking for these different working arrangements to help with living with endometriosis. If you are open and transparent about your policies and discussing them with everybody in the workplace and making everybody feel that it's okay for them to raise this and there won't be any stigma or judgment attached to it. I also think it's really important for employers to make safe spaces for people to feel comfortable. So everybody in the workplace should feel safe and accepted no matter what their condition is. And so by creating safe spaces, people will feel more comfortable speaking openly about the support that they require and how you as their employer can assist them with their condition. So it's Endometriosis Awareness Month. This is an opportune time for you to have a real or virtual coffee break where people with endometriosis and other chronic pain conditions could meet and talk with each other and form a buddy network, but are also able from those meetings to advocate for what they need in the workplace. And finally, I wanted to talk about how you as employers could raise and work to raise awareness of endometriosis, because raising awareness of endometriosis is a great way to help your workplace understand the condition even more. And people don't always have that awareness of endometriosis and how it can impact on, you know, their fellow colleagues. And so educating them on people's lived experiences can lead to a real shift in perspectives. It's an opportune time. It's Endometriosis Awareness Month. And what my workplace is doing is that they have, my workplace has a monthly wellbeing newsletter. So that goes out every month. And so this month, because it is Endometriosis Awareness Month, I am being featured in an article to highlight the month and how the condition affects me, but also more importantly, how the workplace is supporting me. So somebody else reading that, you know, who might not know that they can have the support, will hopefully understand that they can get the support that they need and will be encouraged to talk about the condition because they know it's okay. And so you as employers raising awareness can help your employees learn how to support someone in their team or a colleague who has endometriosis, but also really helping to create and foster that inclusive workplace culture where your staff feel more comfortable talking openly about endometriosis and any other conditions that they may have. So, you know, why don't you, as part of this month, see if anybody in your workplace has endometriosis and if they would be willing to share their experiences of what it's like to live with it, what it's like to work with it, but use that as the start of an education piece with your employees. So that's everything that I wanted to share you for now. Thank you for listening, and I can see that there's already questions coming up, so we look forward to engaging with those very shortly. Thank you.
Sanchia, thank you so much for sharing such a helpful kind of balance of your own personal experience, but also some really, really helpful expertise around what employers can do to be more supportive of this condition. That was really, really helpful. As Sanchia said, we will be moving to a Q&A session shortly. However, before we do that, we're very conscious that we have a wide range of participants in today's webinar. Some of you will be from very small employers, some of you are from very large employers, some will have a desk-based workforce, and some may have others who are not in desk-based roles. So we just wanted to provide a very quick recap of some of the key considerations for any workplaces that are looking to be supportive of endometriosis. So just some thoughts on some initial questions for you to kind of go back and ask yourselves. So firstly, asking if your policies and procedures are supportive of those with endometriosis. As Sanchia really helpfully touched on, one of those can, a particular area can be around sick leave entitlement and policy around that. So there are certain tools that can be used, like things like the Bradford score, for example, which actually really do kind of discriminate against those with chronic or recurrent conditions, as they look upon sick leave absences where there are sort of shorter absences but multiple absences rather than just one long absence as sort of being more detrimental and needing possibly disciplinary action rather than a sort of long absence. So really asking yourselves, are our policies supportive of those with chronic or cyclical symptoms? The next question I would really encourage you to ask yourself is, do all our people managers know about endometriosis? Does everybody who manages staff know about this condition and the impact that it can have? Because really that's where you can have then and ensure a base level of support and understanding across the workforce. We often hear from those with endometriosis about a sort of head in hands moment when you either start a new job or change line manager and you think, okay, right, now the onus is on me again to explain about this complex disease and how it can affect me at work. And so actually it can be incredibly supportive and empowering and a real relief for an employee to say to their line manager or their supervisor, I have endometriosis, and to hear back, oh, I know what that is. Let's have a conversation around what you need and how we can support you. So really encourage you to bring up that base level of knowledge where you can. Another important question really to ask yourself as a workforce and an employer is if you're prepared and ready to respond to individual needs. So we know that the symptoms and the frequency and the impact of endometriosis can really vary from person to person. So as well as arming ourselves with knowledge about this condition and how it can affect people, there needs to be that facility to have a conversation about individual needs and see what flexibility can be applied for each person depending on what their needs are in terms of staying well in work. Another consideration specifically around that flexibility would be, say, if you have a staff member who works shift patterns, for example, can you look at what flexibility can be applied if to their shift patterns, particularly if someone is doing a non-desk-based role, if, for example, they do actually have sort of recurrent or cyclical symptoms, so they're actually fine doing their job and their duties for the majority of the month, but need a bit more understanding and adjustment at certain times, and looking at whether you can offer that, although for those who may be in more 9-to-5 and desk-based jobs, as Sanchia and Becca have helpfully kind of highlighted, what are the opportunities around home working when it's needed. On a really practical level, it's around asking what access there is to things like bathrooms and private space, as we're talking about a disease that can affect the bowel and the bladder, and often those with endometriosis can experience heavy menstrual bleeding. Simply ensuring that your staff have got easy access to bathrooms can be really helpful, as well as private space if they need it, if they are experiencing pain. So asking what's available for them there. And then finally on that uniform, so if you have a workforce that is required to wear a uniform, it's really worth considering what it might be like for somebody with endometriosis. For example, if someone actually is experiencing heavy menstrual bleeding, which some of those with endometriosis will experience, thinking about, are we asking our staff to wear light colours, for example? And as endometriosis is an inflammatory condition, and many of those with the disease can also experience things like bloating. And so again, how comfortable are our uniforms going to be for people to wear and work if they are experiencing symptoms? So something to consider there as well. And then finally, a couple of tips. One thing it certainly is around ensuring that you're ready to signpost to further support. It's not all on you, as I think Becca also said, to know all the answers or to know everything and be able to provide all the support, but simply knowing where people can access support and information, which I will come on to next, is really important. And finally, as I've mentioned, this webinar is the first in a series of webinars and resources that we are developing for employers on a range of common menstrual health conditions. So we really encourage you, if you're wanting to be supportive as a workplace, to sign up for updates on those webinars and on those resources. But just to touch on the resources and support that is available through Endometriosis UK and the support that we provide, we have a number of supportive services. Becca and Sanchia themselves, as I've mentioned, are both support group leaders, and we have a network of support groups available across the UK as well as online. We also have a free helpline service and an online forum that people can access via our website. We also have a regular information webinar programme, especially during this Endometriosis Action Month. We are running weekly webinars on different topics related to endometriosis. And so please do encourage anyone you know to participate and get involved in those. And then finally, for any employers who are looking to go a step further and make a pledge and build a plan and commitment for being supportive of endometriosis and menstrual health in the workplace, we also do have an endometriosis friendly employer scheme, which you can sign up to help you on your way with that work. And more information on all of these things is available on our website, so please do have a look there. So without further ado, we will move now to a time of question and answer. So I can see we've had lots of questions coming in, which is great. And so the first question that's come up is around signposting to any groups or support groups. Santia, I know you said you'd like to answer that. I've touched a little bit on it, but maybe you could tell us a little bit more about the kind of support that you can expect through a support group from your experience.
Yeah, so just wanted to reassure this person that yes, Endometriosis UK do run or have a number of support groups, and obviously since the pandemic a lot of those are online now, so it's really easy to join right across the country as well. So do take a look at the website and you'll be able to locate the list of where all those groups are. And what those groups do is they tend to meet perhaps on a monthly basis with endometriosis sufferers in that location, where they can talk about the things that they need, maybe from the area. So I know that I work very closely with the Endometriosis Centre at Queen's Hospital in Romford, for example, and they're very supportive of the group, and they have supported us with speakers. So we've had the consultant gynecologist who specialises in endometriosis. We've had the pain management clinic from that unit speak. We've had the fertility specialist speak. So really working with the group to understand what topics are of importance to them, and then trying to work to get the speakers. But also we do sometimes just have drop-in meetings where people can just come and just share. And when you're sharing with a fellow sort of endometriosis sufferer, it's really quite refreshing in a way, because you know you're talking to someone who understands the struggle, although you might experience the symptoms and the pain in a different way, but you know that you're just speaking to someone that understands. And even just kind of having that access to other endometriosis sufferers where you can share techniques and just laugh and cry together is also really kind of helpful for me, not just as a support group leader, but also on the receiving end of that as well.
Thanks, Sanjay. That's really helpful to hear a bit about how the groups can help and support in practice. And we do encourage you to signpost anyone who might benefit from one of those groups to our website. Thank you so much. And we've also had another question here that I might point to Becca, if that's okay. Someone's asked a question making the point that, of course, some people may actually suffer in silence with conditions like endometriosis, and they may not choose to tell their employer. And sometimes that can be around kind of concern of being discriminated against. So there's a question here around sort of what can be done to encourage communication from teams and to encourage people to share if they do need workplace support. So I guess very initially I'd say obviously it's always of course somebody's choice whether they choose to disclose about a health condition or what they're going through. But certainly we want to make sure that kind of support is available in different workforces. Becca, would you be able to share if you've got any thoughts on anything in particular that you think could help encourage people to kind of be forthcoming, as you're someone who has been forthcoming in the past about endometriosis?
I think for me, I found it quite easy to be forthcoming because I just have no issue talking about it, but that is not for everybody, of course. And I think that perhaps we've already kind of touched upon it in terms of, you know, when Sanchia was saying about the wellness newsletter, try and get, you know, especially as she said for Endometriosis Action Month, you know, get it highlighted in newsletters, set up sessions, you know, lunch and learn, where, you know, someone from Endometriosis UK could come in and chat about it, and it could be framed in a way of, hey, we're just going to share what this is. It doesn't need to be people with endometriosis come, but I can guarantee they probably will. But, you know, we're not sort of trying to highlight, you know, get them to come out of the woodwork. And also, I guess, encouraging line managers just to check in on people's well-being and being open to, you know, to having that conversation. How are you actually doing? How is your health? I've noticed that, you know, you've been on, they may have been sick more than usual. Are you okay? You know, it's not framing it in a you're in trouble, but just sort of checking in. I think those few situations and ideas could really help people come forward. And I think that the key one is really about the culture in the organisation, which is not an easy fix if it isn't an open culture. But I think that all of those things can help with that.
That's great. Thank you, Becca. Really helpful suggestions there. We've also had a couple of questions come through, Sanchia, that I know you were keen to address. So firstly, there's one around occupational health. Obviously, we know that, I guess, depending on the size of an employer and the kind of resources that they have, the provision will vary, but it'd be great if you'd be happy to talk through that a little bit.
Yeah, so obviously I recognise that there are small and sort of medium-sized businesses here. I mean, I work at London South Bank University, and we've got like 2,500 staff. So we do have an occupational health service, and I, you know, I was referred by my line manager to that, and I found that really helpful, because actually occupational health came back with a number of recommendations, which were, you know, kind of the working from home more frequently when the pain flared up, or sometimes not at all. So they came in with some really helpful adjustments. So if you are a larger employer where you do have access to an occupational health service, and I would say absolutely use that. But for the small employers as well, who may not have sort of a dedicated sort of service, I think just those conversations, just those open, honest and transparent conversations with your members of staff who suffer from endometriosis about what they might need. And some of them might know what they need because they may have worked in various places before where they know what's really helpful for them. But if they're newly diagnosed with endometriosis, it might also be a bit of trial and error, where you might say, actually, let's try this for a month, let's try this for a couple of months and see how it is, and let's review it and maybe need to change it, maybe if they're kind of being diagnosed for the first time. So I think whether you've got an occupational health service or not, I think the key thing is, what is it that your employee needs that's going to support them sort of to be able to be, as I said, their best selves. And whether, you know, you can do it through occupational health if you have that, but the key thing is, you know, the employee feeling comfortable and feeling that they can be open with you about what support that they need.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Sanchia. And we've also had a couple of kind of related questions sort of about the specifics of what's reasonable to expect in terms of reasonable adjustments. Did you have any insights on that?
Yeah, I mean, in the Equality Act, you know, the bounds of reasonable, what's reasonable will also depend on the size of the employer. So like, for example, my university will be expected to do quite a lot because they've got a lot of resources at their disposal. There's a lot of different teams and things like that. Again, if you're in a small organization of 5 or 10 people, what is reasonable for that organization may look quite different. But I think obviously the business needs need to be met, and then but also you suffering from the condition need to have that support. And so I think, you know, what's reasonable is probably, so for example, I think someone's put something in there about working from home fully remotely, and that might not be something that your employer can support. So for example, we have a hybrid working policy, but where I'm supported is that, you know, on the week of my period, I will work from home that week. So there can be flexes to your policy. So I think what I find really helpful as a sufferer is the flexibility. So the flexibility to work from home more often if I need it, but also the flexibility to perhaps change the days that I'm working from home. So generally, I tend to go in the office on a Tuesday and Wednesday, but actually I've got the flexibility to change that and maybe go into the office on a different day. So I think the key word is flexibility. So you've got your standard policies and procedures, but actually endometriosis sufferers need that understanding and they need flexibility, because they need flexibility when they know, for example, around, for me, my period where I know it will flare up, but also there might be unexpected flare-ups where I might have a flare-up in the night and not be well enough to come into the office in the morning. And I also need that flexibility to say, actually, I can't come in today. I need to work from home, or I need to do a little bit of reduced hours because I need to get a bit more rest. So the key word is really just that flexibility and support.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Sanchia. We've also had a couple of questions in which I'll be glad to try and answer. So firstly, someone shared that they have recently set up a women's health initiative within their workplace, which is great news. Thank you for doing it. And just for some advice and ideas on kind of where to start with raising awareness of conditions like endometriosis. We've touched on this a little bit already, but I think the key thing really is about just starting that conversation. I think it was Sanchia who made the suggestion of just putting the ask out and asking, does anyone suffer with this, and who would be willing to kind of come forward and share their experience. And I think we've often found from our work with employers that those with endometriosis are very willing to come forward and be heard, and so that can be a great place to start. Also things like hosting lunchtime talks, for example, and things like that can be really, really effective ways to kind of start a conversation, and start encouraging your workforce to know that this is kind of a safe place that is supportive of this kind of condition, and to start normalizing that conversation. So I hope that helps to some extent. There's also a question from someone sort of looking for examples on sort of particular policies or guidance around menstrual wellbeing at work, and asking if there's any examples that can be shared. So what I'd say is that work is underway, and there will be resources coming. So as I've mentioned, this webinar and this kind of wider project that it's part of is part of a project that is working to develop both sort of webinars, but also information materials on employment related to different common menstrual health conditions. So I'd encourage you, if you're interested in sort of more examples around guidance and best practice, just to make sure you're signed up for the updates on that, as over the course of this long-term project we'll be releasing lots of written information on endometriosis, but also a range of other common menstrual health conditions as well. I do hope that helps when that comes through. I'm just having a little look. Oh yes, Sanchia, we've had another question directed to you around how trade union reps and networks can get employers to do more to recognise, and if you've got any experience working with them.
Yeah, and again, I recognise that trade union reps and staff networks may again only be sort of for the larger employers as well. But I'm a member of Unison and GMB, and I'm for Unison, I'm the women's officer for London South Bank University. So I think as the women's officer, I see it as my role to advocate for, the importance of well-being in the workplace for women. So I think if you are a trade union, whether you're the women's officer or not, there's something about how do you lobby your employer to put this right at the top of their agenda. And your women's staff network can also be involved in helping to shape a menstrual well-being policy, and maybe having a focus group or a session where you can get to liaise with different staff. So I definitely think there's a role for trade union reps and women's staff network to really just push the agenda forward and use their voice to work with their employers to do more. So absolutely, I'm used to doing that, and I do a lot of work with Unison or with their disabled members committee around getting the trade union itself as well, Unison, to advocate for and get workplaces to do more. So yeah, absolutely a role.
That's great. Thank you so much, Sanchia. I'm just keeping an eye. We've got all sorts of really good questions coming through. So actually, one person has actually asked about the endometriosis friendly employer scheme and the types of employers that are on there, and specifically asking if NHS trusts are part of that scheme. I'm pleased to say that we do have a couple of NHS trusts that have joined the endometriosis friendly employer scheme, which we're really, really pleased to see, and we would welcome many others as to join us as would like to. There's also been a question about the future kind of resources and topics that we are sort of delivering as part of this workplace menstrual wellbeing project, and which other conditions will be covered. So as part of the series, we will also be delivering webinars on resources on polycystic ovarian syndrome, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, fibroids, heavy menstrual bleeding, and adenomyosis as well. So you can look out for updates on those. Please bear with us, it's a relatively long project because of the amount that we are looking to cover. And in terms of, there was also a question here about if there's an information pack available from Endometriosis UK to share with teams and start awareness conversations. So there's lots of information available on our website, and as I said, we are developing more resources. So I'd encourage you to go to the employers section of our website and look on the resources page, but also more generally on the information about endometriosis as well. And we do also have a range of videos on our YouTube channel, which you're very welcome to look at as well. There's also another resource question about a template around creating guidance for managers. So as I've mentioned, as this project progresses, we'll be releasing more written information that can be used in direct relation to kind of managing staff with endometriosis and other conditions. So please do sign up for updates on that. I'm just having a quick scan through the questions. Becca and Sanchi, have you seen any other questions that you would be keen to answer just while I scan through?
There was one that was just, it was really just a, can you please, sort of chat a bit about this, about surgeries and recovery. And I think that's a really key point to sort of emphasize. Is myself, I've had 6 surgeries since I was diagnosed when I was 30. I'm now 37. I will need more surgeries for the rest of my life. And it does take time to recover. And as this person said, that, you're not then cured after you've had a surgery. And I think that's a key sort of point for employers to take into account, that, there is no cure for endometriosis, and it is about management, and that, we may need these longer times off for surgery and recovery. And the mental health impact of living with the disease, but also in recovery. General anaesthetic can give you depression, essentially. So there will likely be a big mental health dip for sufferers when they do go through surgery, quite aside from recovering physically and trying to get back on track with life. So I think it really just, again, sounded like a broken record. It boils down to compassion, being open to communicate about these things, and trusting that when we say this is what's happening, it's what's happening. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much, Becca. I'm aware we're very nearly at time, but I have seen we have had quite a few questions come through around endometriosis and disability. So as many of you will know, endometriosis isn't automatically classed as a disability. And the reason for that is, as we sort of touched on at the start of the session, the symptoms and impact of endometriosis can really vary from person to person. And so for some, they might have endometriosis, but with certain treatment and management, it can have very minimal impact on their daily or working lives. So that's why endometriosis isn't automatically classed as a disability for everyone who has it. However, certainly for some of those with the disease, the impacts can be very, very severe. And therefore, under that stance, some of those with endometriosis may be covered by the Equalities Act, and their condition is classed as disabling. And I'm aware we're at 1:31, so we're just slightly over time. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. Thank you most especially to Sanjia and Becca for all that you shared with us this afternoon. And thank you again to everyone who has joined. I wish you all a really good afternoon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.